Over the past 10 months or so, I have had lots of time to form my various opinions on Tears of the Kingdom, and I have realized that after over 300 hours of playtime, I still haven't beaten Tears of the Kingdom. If you asked me within the first 15 hours of my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom, I would have told you that it was the best game I had ever played. However, as I continued to play, my motivation to beat the game began to deteriorate. Tears of the Kingdom consumed my life for the better part of 4 months after its initial release in May of 2023, and the anticipation I had for this game was immense, and I couldn't even beat it. Not because it was too difficult, simply because I lost the desire to play. This is how the most anticipated game of 2023 lost me. For some context, I became what is known to be a completionist, which in short means that I like to do everything in video games, completing all the quests, collecting everything the world has to offer, until I see that shiny 100% sign, or the "you have completed all achievement" sign, so on and so forth. I adopted this playstyle after I completed my first playthrough of Breath of the Wild back in 2019. After I finished, I just wanted more. So I proceeded to collect all the Koroks and upgrade all the armor, get all the shrines and everything else in the game that contributed to that completionist ending that I wanted. The endgame content was so good in fact that I 100%ed Breath of the Wild. Twice. Not only that, I learned to speedrun, which made me invest another huge amount of time into the game. Whereas of today, I have totaled over 1,000 hours into Breath of the Wild. But with Tears of the Kingdom, there was something different about it that didn't seem to happen in Breath of the Wild, which not only made me not 100% the game, it made me not even attempt it in the first place. But why? At this point, I still don't have a concrete answer, but this question imposed an itch on my brain that I needed to scratch. So over the past couple weeks, I've compiled the reasons on why I couldn't finish or even speedrun Tears of the Kingdom. Also, a quick disclaimer, when I refer to the term beat, I'm simply talking about 100%ing the game. Now, my first reason has to be because of the performance of Tears.
The part about performance I think needs to be researched more. There are many reasons that a game could be performing poorly. One common reason is too many entities. Let's give it out the favorite thing to check, among other reasons. Before playing the game,
the friendships are completely objective.
Agreed, except the part about the game was badly. I don't really get the favorite of the wild here. Very well.
Just because the game is well optimized does not mean that it runs well. Tears could have easily been a 70GB or more game, but no. They compressed it down to just 16GB. While this is a good thing in principle, considering I could download Tears fairly quickly and I could boot the game almost instantly, it naturally also came with its various issues. Firstly, asset swapping and pop-ins were already seen in Breath of the Wild and sadly persisted in Tears. Now this isn't a huge issue for me, because it's not to the degree where I'll just be walking around and a mountain will just pull up out of nowhere, but it is a bit jarring. The frame dips were my real issue though. For me, it didn't really matter that Tears could only reach maximum of 30 FPS, because as a general rule of thumb, I only care if my games run smoothly or not, and it most definitely did not do that in Tears. Now, the Switch was obviously not built to be as powerful as a desktop or something of that caliber, considering that it needed to be easily transportable. But this game almost constantly dropped frames no matter what I did. Within the first 30 hours of playtime, I just decided to emulate Tears on my PC, simply because the performance was so much better. My second reason is the story. Don't get me wrong, the story was absolutely amazing, but that's what the problem was. It was so emotionally taxing for me that by the end, I just felt that there was no need to do anything after that, amongst other things which I'll talk about later. Like any good story, which, believe me, this is a good story, this one starts at the beginning. Link and Zelda are exploring underneath Hyrule Castle, after supposedly seeing a malice-like substance making Hylians fall ill on the surface. Link and Zelda discover multiple different historic depictions on the walls showing the history of the Zonai and the Imprisoning War. The Zonai were the first rulers of Hyrule, and it was also depicted that the Zonai were direct descendants to the current royal family. The drawing showed how the first king of Hyrule sacrificed his life to imprison the ancient evil Ganondorf. But since Ganondorf was born from a forever repeating curse, this sacrificial act by the king was only going to delay Ganon's eventual rule. I find this narrative a bit odd though, because in Breath of the Wild, Impa explains to Link that a goddess and a warrior with an ancient sword sealed the darkness, and that was speculated to be the Imprisoning War, but this narrative was completely absent throughout my entire playthrough. Anyway, after this, Link and Zelda discover a Ganondorf who looks like he's over 1,000 years old, and arm is holding Ganon in place, but then soon falls off, revealing a stone of some sorts. Ganon then wakes up from his slumber, shatters the Master Sword, gives Link's right arm cancer, and throws Zelda in a pit, where she seemingly disappears in a golden explosion. This was by far one of the best openings I had seen from a Zelda game, and it posed so many questions in my head. At that point, I was so overwhelmed with excitement because I had waited for this game for many years. After getting dumped on the Great Sky Island, I proceeded to get the main abilities of the game, and got very sad because all the glitches from Breath of the Wild had been patched. The structure of the tutorial remained the same to that of Breath of the Wild's tutorial, of going to 4 shrines to claim the various tools to be used in the game. I found this structure worked really well, as it gives the player a smaller area to test the new physics engine and different mechanics of the game without it really feeling like a standard tutorial. After completing said tutorial, I leaped down into the revamped Hyrule and started my journey, and once I had landed at Lookout Landing, the story started to evolve. After meeting Pura, we could speculate that Tears took place around 10 years after the events of Breath of the Wild because Pura accidentally turned herself into a child in Breath of the Wild, but now she is a teenager. I then went on a quest looking for Zelda around the castle to no avail. Reporting back to Pura gave me 4 different quests to investigate the whereabouts of Zelda. Those 4 quests seemed to replace the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild and led to a lot of great puzzle solving, and felt like actual dungeons. After this, I gained access to the 5 sages and decided to focus more on the memory quest of the game. I then learned that Zelda turned into a mortal light dragon and that she was permanently stuck in that state. After all this, I decided to go beat the game, and after all that, I was so drained of how much information I had to take in. Before even considering attempting 100%, I took a 3-month break from the game just before the Ganon fight. After I returned, I expected a big celebration, where all the NPCs gathered at the gate of Hyrule Castle, and we all celebrated sealing away the ancient evil, while Zelda just hung out in the sky or something. But not only did I not get a celebratory party, no one acknowledged the fact that I had just saved the world. I knew that this was likely to happen since this was the same case in Breath of the Wild. However, Breath of the Wild story required so little effort, and yes, the ending was amazing, but at least I was okay with the fact that no one really acknowledged that I beat Calamity Ganon. It doesn't just end there though, because of side quests. They technically count as a story aspect of the game, and some of them actually enhanced my experience with the main story. I don't really have much to say about side quests in any game in general, due to them mainly acting as filler content, but especially because they were decent for the most part in Tears. A lot of them really challenged my problem solving, which I must admit I'm not the best at, which I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the quest chain in particular where you and a Rito news reporter called Pen investigate rumors of the princess's whereabouts. Overall, I never found myself actively seeking out side content. Rather, if I was exploring and happened to find a side quest and never found it interesting enough, I would do it as soon as I got it. But as a general rule of thumb, I would be given a new side quest and completely forget about it. The reason for this was because all side quests had pretty mediocre rewards upon completion. For example, the Duchess Who Disappeared is a quest revolving around the shield surfing minigame host, Selmy, who was seen in Breath of the Wild. The minigame is simple: to shield surf down a snowy mountain in the Hebrew region and try to get to the best time possible. Anyway, coming back to Tears, after I visited Selmy's hut, she had disappeared. I then received the quest and proceeded to search for Selmy all over the Hebrew region. After some time, I found Selmy stuck in a cave, and after all of that, my reward was a puny Zonai shield. That was my big problem with side quests. Without the motivation of achieving a completionist ending, there was no point to them in the first place. The side quests were of the same style in Breath of the Wild, but the sheer volume of them in Tears is just way too daunting for me, which I will also be talking about later. I did appreciate Nintendo's efforts to fix this system with the addition of side adventures. They are somewhat of a compromise between a main quest and a side quest, being where I could still find a decent amount of content. For example, the side adventures where I had to search for Master Koga in the depths. This quest chain was enthralling and gave me access to a whole list of Zonai devices as well as the location of the Demon King. The fact that Tears is an open world game can mess with people's enjoyment of the story. For example, in this video titled I Couldn't Finish Tears of the Kingdom, the creator speaks of him carrying out the Dragon Tears questline, meaning that he knew that Zelda was a dragon since the early hours of his playthrough. This was significant enough for him to not even finish the main story in the first place, which is a massive shame considering the end was so good.
Integration, it cost me my immersion and will ultimately detract from whatever ending they did actually make. No matter how good the ending is, the fact remains that I got so frustrated with how they integrated this core questline that it made me want to stop playing their game. Right now I'm still too frustrated and disappointed with how Nintendo handled their story to keep playing, but when that changes and I do eventually get over it and I finish the game, maybe I'll make another video.
My point is that the order in which I decided to go through the story was a massive coincidence, and was critically important that it would have completely ruined my experience if I hadn't completed the story in the order that I did. I think the way I completed said story was how Nintendo intended it to be, because after the 4 regional phenomena, I discovered that Zelda was a fragmentation of Ganondorf, and that posed the question of where she actually was. After this, I completed the Dragon Tears questline and discovered that Zelda ate a secret stone, turned into the Immortal Light Dragon in order to bring the Master Sword to Link in the present. This type of cutscene-based storytelling established in Breath of the Wild does not work in Tears of the Kingdom because of the way that it was implemented. In Breath of the Wild, this system worked very well because finding the memories in the game only added to the story, but it never influenced the story happening in the present. It was more about adding parts of context that wouldn't have left unanswered questions in my head if I had not discovered them during my playthrough. I don't think the Dragon Tears narrative should have been removed altogether, because it was the best part of the story for me, but I do think that a different system should have been implemented so that the order in which the player discovered these memories from the past are different. I think it worked better in Breath of the Wild because the main part of the story had already happened, and the memories just told me more about what happened. Whereas in Tears, the story takes place both in the past and in the present, which creates this weird dynamic which is very hard to tell the story in a controlled way. I came up with a system that I think would have fixed this issue, being every time a Link completed one of the 4 regional dungeons, he enters the Shadow Realm filled with smoke with one of the ancestors from the Zonai War. The Descendants acts as a shopkeeper, and you can choose all the basic level memories that don't really spoil things that happen later in the game, and the more important memories can only be unlocked by reaching a certain point in progression. I do admit that this system contradicts the whole open world system, so either this type of storytelling would need to be scrapped altogether, or to keep this narrative but find a different system to tell the story in the past. I do have one gripe about the actual narrative of the story though, being the focal point of said narrative: Zelda. Until I finished the Dragon Tears questline, the main quest for the game was to find Princess Zelda. Everyone seemed to forget about the godlike mummy in the basement being so powerful that he shattered the Master Sword in less than a second and was the single reason for the creation of the Sky Islands, the depths, and Link's weird new arm. When I play a Zelda game, I come to beat the ancient evil, save the world, so on and so forth. Not go and save my speculated girlfriend. Yes, Nintendo did drop massive hints throughout the game that suggested that Link and Zelda are in a relationship. For example, Link and Zelda living in the same house, Zelda secretly making a tunic for Link which she hid in Hyrule Castle, and also their dynamic within the opening scene of the game. The opening scene in particular was geniusly produced, by the way. Nintendo teased the fact that Zelda might be playable with the many different cutscene and dialogue interactions. It created this very wholesome dynamic between Link and Zelda, and I think this was done intentionally so that they could immediately break this dynamic by throwing Zelda into the past. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Overall, this was some of the best story I've had within a Zelda game, but since it was so demanding for me, I had no desire to 100% the game. My next problem comes with the exploration of the game, which arguably should be the best component for an open world game, but I digress. Since Tears is technically a sequel, in principle it is fine to reuse the same map from Breath of the Wild, and luckily Nintendo did give us a whole list of new options to quickly traverse this map. However, new areas were added to try and add some variation to the old map. Places like the Sky Islands, the various caves, as well as the depths are great examples of this. I would have thought that the addition of these elements would have made exploration extremely fun, and for the first few hours of gameplay, it was extremely fun, because of its novelty. What I mean by this is that everything was new, which made me want to explore, but this novelty quickly started to dissipate. Nintendo had made the biggest mistake that they could for an open world game: quantity over quality. Whether it be the Sky Islands, the depths, or the caves, once I had seen a few of them, I had seen all of them. I really enjoy the atmospheres of all the different areas added to the game, like the calm, subdued atmosphere of the Sky Islands, or when I first entered the depths. As soon as I dropped down into one of those holes on the surface, I was instantly filled with fear. The absolute pitch darkness, with that eerie music in the background, kept constant tension every time I explored down there. I explored a large portion of the depths without realizing that I had to activate light routes to actually see my surroundings, but I'm kind of disappointed that I did discover light routes. Without them, I was having a blast exploring through that eternal darkness until I would stumble into an enemy camp or a random puzzle. I felt so lucky and accomplished when I actually found something, even if it was something small and insignificant. Without light routes, I was so scared while exploring in the depths that I would actively take breaks from the game just to get the depths out of my head. Once I discovered the light routes in the depths, I came to the realization that the depths was an empty vacuum filled with absolutely no substance. When it comes towards my absolute distaste and lack of content that I found in the depths, I like to think of it like a desert. There are open sand dunes for miles and miles, maybe there was a cactus or a tumbleweed here and there, but for the most part it's a soulless, empty plain with no driving force that enticed me to invest my time into it. The case was similar, but to a lesser degree for the Sky Islands. The Sky Islands being boring makes absolutely no sense because of a few reasons. One of them being, despite that it's the main selling point of the game, there are less than 20 Sky Islands in the entire map. Now, after seeing this, you would think that these Sky Islands would be these magical nuggets of exploration, but no. It's still the same desert analogy. Sky Islands aren't all bad though, since most, if not all of them, have something of value, like a shrine or a Zonai device dispenser, but there isn't anything to explore because the individual islands are so tiny. I would have liked to see some changes in the biome for the sky as well, like all the ones hovering over Death Mountain could be burning or something like that, to add some variation. I think we can all agree when I say that the surface was the most interesting part of the map, for a multitude of reasons, such as more enemy variety, where the main and side quests take place, etc. The surface map was where I spent most of my time exploring, after I realized that both the depths and the Sky Islands were incredibly soulless and empty. But even then, my exploration on the surface was short-lived. Since I had invested so much time into Breath of the Wild before playing Tears, I had seen the same map over and over again, and thus had no motivation to explore, and the fact that the only real reward possible from exploring was shrines and Koroks, I just did the story and put the game down. Now, I wondered why I had no motivation to find Koroks and shrines and Tears, considering I collected all of them in Breath of the Wild, and now I have an answer. I didn't like doing it in Breath of the Wild either. Since there were just so many Koroks and shrines in Breath of the Wild, it was impossible for a casual player such as myself to find all of them without the help of a map, which was the most painstakingly boring thing I had ever experienced. And since Tears decided to change nothing about the system, or rather to add anything to the system, there was nothing worth for me to justify spending my time looking for it. As I mentioned in the intro of this video, the endgame content of Breath of the Wild was really good, but in Tears, there is basically no endgame content whatsoever. The reason I say this is because I consider endgame content to be things that are only possible after reaching a certain checkpoint of progress. For example, the Champions Battle DLC in Breath of the Wild was only available after completing all 4 Divine Beasts. Thus, everything that came in the base game I didn't really consider to be endgame content, because I could have done it at any point. Now, it's been long confirmed that Tears would not receive a DLC, which I thought was not that big of a deal considering that there was so much to do in this new Hyrule. But once I had realized that there wasn't a lot to do in this new Hyrule, then I really started to crave that DLC. To be honest, I would have been perfectly satisfied if Nintendo just released Master Mode and called it a day, because at least that would have maybe motivated me to start a new playthrough to experience how their game would have changed. The executive developer of Tears stated that he felt there was no need for a DLC since he had done everything he could with this version of Hyrule, which I think is just a pretty lousy excuse for we didn't use our production time properly. Nintendo had 6 years to make a sequel in which they already had the map for and all the base enemies and mechanics. All they needed to do was make it better, and I believe their definition of making a sequel is just to add more stuff. Somehow 900 Koroks wasn't enough, so why not just add an extra 100, and same with the shrines. Instead of just trying to add more, they should have taken into account some of the very strong opinions expressed by the community on Breath of the Wild, and at least fix those issues in Tears of the Kingdom. I think this goes for anything that is a sequel to anything in a series. It should always keep the core concepts, but also reinvent the wheel in other aspects. Now, I'm not 100% sure how I would fix this issue myself with actual examples, but a man can only dream. Now, my final reasoning for why I still have not 100%ed Tears of the Kingdom is because it's just too much. I see what Nintendo were going for by just adding so much stuff that the players were spoiled for choice, and I think that this was very well designed. For people such as myself who feel inclined to do everything in a game, it just becomes too much. Just to bring a tangible perspective for my point, here's a quick list of some of the things that you have to do in order to 100% Tears of the Kingdom. Maybe I am just being a bit of a baby because I have seen hundreds of videos of people talking about their experiences of 100% Tears of the Kingdom, and I have no idea how people have done it so quickly. I think in Zelda games especially, I find 100%ing them in general to be extremely tedious, and having no driving force to actually do it. I guess for that I can't really call myself a completionist when I can't even finish a simple Zelda game, but I'm already juggling so much in my life that I simply don't have the time to invest my hours into a game I'm not actually enjoying. And maybe if this video does well enough, I'll actually 100% Tears and talk about everything I have to say about the game. But that's a story for another video.